Welcome to Veronica Live, and we are here with our next guest this morning, and he is a lawyer here in Panama City, and his name is Eric Garmon, and he's running to be our next state attorney. So welcome, Eric. We love having candidates on the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So tell us your background. Let's start there. Where you went to school, how you ended up becoming a lawyer, and what kind of law that you actually do practice.
Sure. I grew up on Panama City Beach, attended elementary, middle, and high school there. And then after high school, I joined the Marine Corps. It was right after the towers had been hit, so I did what so many of us did in that era. And then after my Marine Corps service, I returned back home and enrolled in community college, and then decided, I still have that yearn to serve right now. So I went into law enforcement, and I was in law enforcement for 5 years active. And then about 5 years in, I said, well, maybe I want to go back to school, but I still definitely want to be involved in what I'm doing. So the natural choice was then made to go to law school. But when I went to law school, I still served my community in a reserve officer capacity. And I did that until just about a year and a half ago. So I'm actually still hold current law enforcement standards.
Oh, wow.
And so my service kind of went from the Bay County Sheriff's Office to Panama City Police Department, where I was a training officer and a traffic homicide investigator. And then when I was in the reserve capacity, I served for Panama City Beach, Parker, and the Bay District schools. So I also got to see quite a large array and difference in the not only community, but the levels and sizes of the agency and the different challenges that they can face. It really at every level. So after that, and while I was still being a reserve officer, I became an attorney here locally. I've been an attorney here locally for 7 years now, and I practice in the Panama City area. I handle criminal matters, and I also handle transactional matters. I try to keep some things that are a little more boring and predictable, having 2 5-year-olds. So it's,
And what does transactional mean? What kind of law are you doing there? Like contracts or?
Yeah, that's right. Contract reviews and things like that. So, that's a little easier to plan around, but definitely my heart and my passion is still in the courtroom. I love any opportunity I can to advocate. And I also do just a lot of volunteer work, not only with veterans, being a veteran myself, but also with victims and victims' rights.
Wow. And what made you want to become a lawyer? Because it's a different thing, though, versus serving in a uniform. Is it trying to help the people?
It is. I mean, at the end of the day, I looked around and I said, I want something a little more, as far as educationally. So I knew I had to go back to school. So really the clear choice there, if I wanted to stay in that field, would either be, federal law enforcement or the law. And many times, the law can lead to the same. So I knew that a law degree would not only give me just a wonderful base of knowledge and education. It's really just, the foundational degree for a lot of, again, federal, law enforcement jobs and beyond. So I went into law school with a really open mind, not knowing if maybe I'd go back in as a JAG officer or whatnot. But I just every time I leave the community, I want to come back, and every time I come back, I want to serve. So it's just
beautiful.
Kind of a natural, lifelong pull, if you will. I mean,
right.
I've served in government at the city, the county, the state, and now the federal level as well, as I worked for the Veterans Administration for about a year during COVID. So I've seen every level of it, and every level has definitely different challenges, but also definite, things you can learn and take away and make yourself better.
Very true.
So Eric, what makes you want to jump into the swamp of politics?
with the good old boys and girls.
Yeah, right. You're obviously taking on an incumbent here, and
Right.
politics is hardball. It's not.
John
It's
stole my
just math.
question. I need a lawyer.
Well, look, politics is hardball, and I think as long as you understand that you're entering that realm willingly, and if you're doing it for the right reasons and with a servant's heart, then it's okay. People are going to say things about you, or whether they're true or not. And I'm sure the same thing happens to my opponent. But you just have to remember why you're serving and what you're looking to achieve. And as far as what made me want to jump in, again, I've got 2 5-year-olds. I call them twins. They're adopted. They're only 4 months apart. So
Wow.
most people look like I have a leg growing out of my head when I said I'm going to run for office at 6 counties. That because free time is definitely not as a parent one of your things. But look, anything worth doing is usually going to be hard. And if you only did the easy things in life, then not really a life that I believe is worth living. So when I looked at running, it's really it's the same thing. It's the same reason that I joined the Marine Corps. It's the same reason that I joined the police force. It's answering a call that I saw and seeing that there's what I perceive to be an issue, and I can fix it. So luckily, I've got a very supportive wife that said, absolutely, I believe that you can fix it too. So I saw an issue, and I saw a problem in our community, and I said, well, I'm going to fix it.
So taking on an incumbent is really hard. And I go back to the wars back when Jim Appleman was state attorney and Chris Patterson was running against him, and my wife and I were very, very strong supporters of Chris, and he narrowly lost, to the incumbent, and you are taking on an incumbent here. So what is it that you see as the problem, and why are you running, or why do you think you can fix it?
Sure. Well, as far as what problems do I see, we don't have that long of a show, but what I can tell you is it really all can boil down to a primary thing. I mean, there are definitely a few large topics, but one is just extreme inefficiency. And it's more than just, we're spending money where we shouldn't. And otherwise, it has effect on the actual prosecution of cases and the pendency of cases. And a good for example is my opponent has been a prosecutor for a very long time. He'll be the first to tell you, look, I've been a prosecutor for 36 years. I'm not going to tell you that he's a bad prosecutor. What I'm going to tell you is that his experience is extremely limited. It is limited to the one role of being the prosecutor and now being the elected state attorney. But there's not a lot of life experience outside mixed in. And how does that interplay with the state, local, federal systems? How does that interplay with the business owners? Where he has more prosecutorial experience than me, I have a lot more experience in business than him. And really a lot of the issues that I saw were as a businessman. I mean, I've been running a business or two or three since I left the police force in 2011. And just as you kind of break the skin off your knuckles as a business owner and you're sitting around making hard choices, especially as far as staff and recruiting and opportunity costs and all the normal things, you learn a lot of hard lessons. And those are not lessons that you necessarily always are going to learn in a governmental role. And I can say that having been in a governmental role. So when you start looking at that, it can lead to a lot of other things, and I'd be happy to expand on that if you'd like.
Well, I guess tell us how big the role is. Like, how many counties will you be overseeing? So people that don't understand what the state attorney does, kind of fill us in.
Sure. The state attorney is the chief elected prosecutor, and some would say the chief law enforcement officer, because at the end of the day, whether a case goes forward or not is up to you. But for a 6-county area, and for our area, that's Bay, Jackson, Holmes, Calhoun, Gulf, and Washington. Now, that's a large area. In some areas of the state, it's only one county because it's really population-based. The 1st District, which is west of us, is only 4. counties, for instance. But you're the chief elected prosecutor, and really the buck stops with you in your area. I mean, there is an elected attorney general, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, good luck. A statewide race must be hard." And I'm like, no, that's a different role. But you're really the buck stops with you, not even with the attorney general. I mean, the attorney general may pick it up in special instances where there's multi-counties involved or an appeal, but in most matters in criminal and circuit court, you or your staff have the ultimate say in charging decisions, right? And the problem right now is not only is it a large role for the elected state attorney, it's a large role for any of his assistants, because he's saying, I'm entrusting you to stand in my place. And where that role becomes very large, especially in prosecutorial overreach or danger, is Florida is an information state. So if a charge comes in, the ultimate and complete decision whether or not to charge somebody falls on one person. It's not a grand jury. Now, there are instances in Florida with a grand jury, but it falls on one person. And right now, you don't have any consistency in those charging decisions and any consistency in training. So you get a large, varied result. And not only that, when you as the state attorney or as the assistant state attorney, when you raise your hand and you swear under a formal charging document that somebody has committed a crime, you're swearing that you've talked to the witnesses, you've done all that you can do. And what we find, and what you can easily find just by a review of records, is most times there's absolutely no review, right? And that's bad on two ends. That's bad if you're falsely accused of a crime and there's exonerative evidence. I mean, a lot of times there's body camera that completely is different than a report, and that happens. I mean, that's not saying anything against a police officer. It's just sometimes there's evidence that's completely in the face of what's being alleged, but somebody might be facing felony or misdemeanor charges for 5 and 6 months before a video finally gets watched. That's an issue. But alternatively, if you're not reviewing anything, somebody that maybe the cop or the investigator forgot to give one document, and if you're not reaching back out to those police officers and following up and doing what you're supposed to do and watch those videos and make a full decision, then you very well might be letting somebody go that shouldn't be let go. So really, either way, with no intake process and with no screening process other than just, these prosecutors who are overworked, and look, they are doing the absolute best they can. I mean, they've got 450 cases. This is just a nationwide issue. It's not locally. But a local issue is, I mean, all over the state, there are intake departments. There are, specialized units, and there's no reason that it cannot be done here. And really, I would say justice demands it.
So are you saying, I've got two questions on what you've been saying. So my first one, who are the reviewing people? Are they not reviewing everything, is what you're saying? Is that the state attorney and the assistant state attorney, or the other lawyers that are working for them? That's question one. And then if nobody's reviewing your stuff, and you're saying some people get let off, are we letting people languish in prison while we're waiting for this as well?
Absolutely. So as to question number one, right now, I won't say that no one is reviewing it, but they're not always reviewing it. So if you go to a hospital and you walk in, you don't just walk in with having no questions asked to you. They take you back and they say, "All right, we're gonna cut your arm off." You're like, "Oh, I'm here for sinus infection. What are you talking about?"
Right.
So we need a robust intake department, right? And the intake department, look, you have such a large volume of cases that are things still going to be missed? Sure, things will always be missed if you don't look. And I mean, I can give many, many, many examples, and many others can, to where again, it's just the very short narrative that the prosecutors have time to read is different. So if you had a prosecutor, and or two. I mean, we have a smaller office here than, Miami or something like that, but at least one prosecutor who's a very seasoned prosecutor and knows the different, ins and outs and how things go. And they have even a staff of investigators or even paralegals to just watch videos. Then so much can be caught. And I know that this can be done. The public defender's office reviews every video that comes through their door, right? So is it hard? Yes. But again, just because something's hard does not mean it shouldn't be done, especially when you're dealing with somebody's life in the wake. A very good example of this, a gentleman was pulled over, and he was accused of having drugs. It ended up that the drugs in the vehicle, not only was the car not his, he was borrowing it to go get his sister, but the vehicle were his father's, and they were seizure medicine, and they were in the glove box, right? So when the cops see it, he hands the bottle to them. He's a CDL Class A driver, and the cops on the video say, listen, I know that you didn't know about these drugs. I know that the vehicle is not yours. I know they're basically, you didn't know anything about this. We're still taking you to jail. And that doesn't mean the charge is going to stick. If you tell the judge all this in the morning, I'm sure he'll throw it out. Now, again, that's a training issue on the cop. I don't believe that cop was acting nefariously. I just think there's a training issue there. But on the state attorney side, by the time the prosecutors watched that video, 5 months had elapsed and formal charges had already been levied. And, he was unable to work because he's drug tested every week. He's a Class A CDL driver, and he's, being held on felony charges.
What's a class? What kind of driver is that? What does that mean?
That's your highest. Yeah, that's your CDL, your commercial. You can drive large semi-trucks.
Oh, wow. Well, so it impacted him financially and everything. Wow.
Absolutely.
Oh,
and
that's
his family.
rough.
And, to the prosecutor's credit, when it got reassigned and a prosecutor finally watched it, the reaction was, man, this is just absolutely disgusting, and we're so sorry, and, we'll help, do what we can to expunge the gentleman's record. But the fact of the matter is if that video had been watched, then that case would have been over very shortly. He never would have been formally charged. And more importantly, things like this are also clogging our jails. I mean, our jail has consistently been overcrowded. And, Hurricane Michael was an issue, COVID was an issue, but we're far and away from that. We've got people sitting in jail for 60 days on camping on the beach and other charges that just, the jail, absolutely, people need to be in there. There are people that do not belong in society, but there are also, when we're paying Walton County upwards of $2 million a year to house our excess, then we need to be taking a lot harder look, a lot faster at cases. So that's just one example as to things not being reviewed, and it's really a system, right? So when I decided to run for state attorney, I did what I would do when I start any business, and that's formulate a business plan, right? Look at where our process is weak, and unfortunately, in the the business world, if a process is weak or not efficient, then you lose money. But if a process is weak or not efficient in this context, people's liberties can be affected. And again, that can also be, unfortunately, sometimes letting folks, go that maybe there was evidence that they just didn't have. But so that goes to the first part of your question. As to the second part of your question, I'm sorry, compound question. Can you remind me what that?
Well, it was kind of like, are people languishing in prison? Because, John and I just hosted an author that wrote the American Gulag Chronicles, and it's our J6 prisoners. Literally, they're languishing in prison for 3 years, can't get their legal, appointed attorney half the time. They've been treated so bad, and I'm with you. There's criminals. Some people aren't always criminals. And honestly, I don't know if all these people that are in the jail are actually criminals, except for people don't like their politics. And so after reading that book and having the author on it, it's horrible what goes down in prison. And I don't want anybody languishing in prison that doesn't belong there.
Right.
And since when, if you've committed a misdemeanor, you're languishing in prison for 3 years. So So anyways, that was my next question is who's languishing in prison? And then you talked about paying that other county $2 million to house these prisoners. Could you not use that money? Are you authorized as a state attorney to reallocate that money to hire one or two more lawyers to get through that stuff quickly so that you don't have to have this excess prisoners in other counties? Yeah, I keep asking you compound questions. Sorry. I've had a lot of coffee.
And that's a really complicated one, right? Because that money really would be more from the county commissioner in the jail, depending on what pot it's coming from.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that any of the funds would be part of the state attorney's office, but what you'll hear, I invite you, and actually, really, I invite you just to go down to an arraignment or a pretrial criminal one day. It's 100, 200 people come through. And another thing that you'll hear is, I'd love to get a deal. I'd love to talk to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor very aptly and correctly says, well, listen, I don't have time to come down to the jail and talk to you alone. And if you really want to talk to me, hire a lawyer or public defender. Well, again, the jail, and I've confirmed this with the warden, the jail has plenty of empty rooms, and they have interview rooms. Either assign permanently or 1 or 2 days a week, have a prosecutor go to the jail. I mean, hey, you want to make a deal with it? You want to take a plea? Then here I am. Do you have a question about your case? Let's get it going. Again, that's something that costs you nothing extra, right? I'm not having to come on and hire anybody extra, but there was a case in Jackson County, blanking on her name, but Janine, she was a former tax collector employee, and they tried her 4 times. Well, on the morning of the 4th trial, she took a plea to the charges, but they had one prosecutor. Okay, they had one prosecutor assigned to that case. The only case that prosecutor had, and they were paying that prosecutor $147,000 a year, give or take. And there was a mistrial, witness tampering, and some other issues. But as far as inefficiencies go, I mean, you could have funded probably 2 prosecutors off of that salary. But again, between political favors and however else you want to justify it, that could have easily funded 3 or 4 investigators or paralegals to watch videos. So the money is there. And again, a lot of these things are just process issues, leadership choices. A good example of that also is, at the end of the day, the last time that you had Mr. Bassford on your show, he said, it's our job to make sure that no innocent person is ever prosecuted for a crime they did not commit. I would contend to you that what I've just laid out, that's very commonly not what's happening. Now, even at the end of the day, if they do dismiss the case, 6 months, a year, 2 years in, well, that still has greatly affected your life for 2 years, and Google doesn't have an expiration date, right? So
right.
You now have a large history for employers, but yet again, under Mr. Hess's, the previous state attorney, under his rule, the former chief prosecutor for major crimes has, at the time had 25 plus years of experience, very experienced, and had a 30-0 conviction rate on murders, right? He won 30 of 30 murders. He just, again, leadership sometimes is being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and sometimes maybe there's a person that you might not, invite over for dinner, but they're still the best person for the job. So Mr. Sambathi, the former head of major crimes, was relieved of his duty, and a much younger prosecutor was brought in, and there's nothing wrong with younger prosecutors, but maybe bring him in as a number 2. And since then, and since that choice, we've lost 6 murder trials, and 4 of those in Bay County, and 2 in Jackson County, 1 in Washington, and 3 in Bay. And I would say that's 6 too many, for really 2 reasons. One, if you're not doing your correct homework, then maybe you shouldn't have taken that case to trial. But if you do and you have the experience, that's not making us safer. And again, there's really no reason why Mr. Sambathi I'm sure he may or may not like me throwing him out there, but look, he did a wonderful job, and he's one of the examples of some wonderful prosecutors that, because of some of the internal issues, have left the office and really left a vacuum of experience. That doesn't mean that they're not doing a wonderful job there now. I mean, really, the office, the assistant prosecutors are great, but losing 6 murders is not a good look. And it's every case is different. But when you go from 30-0 to whatever the current record is in 6, there's something is going on.
Well, I go ahead, John.
I was going to say, Eric, do you think there's this what it speaks to me is consistency, and it seems across the state there's this inconsistency in the state attorney's offices, and I'm not sure, what the relationship is with the state, with Ashley Moody's office, state attorney, and then the district state attorneys, for uniformity, because we've seen Governor DeSantis remove, I think was it the Orlando district attorney, because she wouldn't charge for capital crimes. She was just saying, hey, it's off the table, for the death penalty, and that's a legitimate, that's not the prosecutor's job to make that kind of decision. I don't think the law is the law. Your job is to, bring charges in accordance with the law and follow the law. If you don't like the law, then get out of the job. But how do you bring that consistency to the office? And the example of reviewing the body cam is an excellent example. Does that require the state legislature to pass something that says, the state attorneys will, for people that are charged with the crime and where there's a body cam, that the state attorney's office will review that video within 48 hours.
A couple days.
Pick some number, right? But don't just let it drag on, and add consistency to it across the state so that everybody's equally protected.
Yes, sir. I think that's a great question. And what I would say is, unfortunately, that's a question more for the ballot box and less for the legislature, because the challenges of Citrus County are infinitely different than the challenges of our county, right? So if you start trying to rule and regulate by shalls, then sometimes those just are not appropriate, right? So that's why they give a lot of levity and a lot of leverage to the acting and elected state attorney to say, what's good for our area. But I also would say that, to your point a little bit, there are certain things that are good for any area, right? It doesn't matter where you are. And, one of the things that I've done is another benefit that I have is I was a police officer under 2 previous state attorneys, right? So when I'm looking around and I'm saying this seems crazy, well, it is. I mean, it has not always been this way, right? It has not always been this way. We are in a uniquely, inefficient time that really we haven't seen in this area, at least in my 20 years, or I would say 19 years, almost there, in law enforcement, one capacity or another. But a good example is look, leadership is top down, right? Anytime, you'll never hear me in court say, oh, well, my secretary didn't do X, Y, Z, right? It's my name on the bottom of the document. It's mine. Well, the state attorney's name is on the bottom of every document that comes out of that office. So there are certain things that you should be taking into account on yourself to do. And a good example is, for instance, domestic violence. Okay, domestic violence is an issue all around the state, and it's an issue here as well. And under it's 741.2901, if you want to look it up, it's the domestic violence promulgation that was passed statutory, and it gives some shalls, right? And these are things that are not really, they're not optional. And one of the things, and this is what the current state attorney's office, the sheriff's office, I mean, really all the law enforcement, they get this part right, where it says that they shall adopt a pro-prosecution stance on domestic violence, right? If you can determine a primary aggressor, then we need to be going forwards on prosecution and defending victims. They completely, in my experience, negate the entire first subsection, which says that each state attorney shall, not could, maybe, would be great. They shall develop special units or assign prosecutors to specialize in the prosecution of domestic violence cases, right? And that's because domestic violence is an extremely tricky. I mean, look, and I'm telling you this again from many years in law enforcement, seeing it, and that's one of the things that can really differentiate me is, I have been boots on the ground in the living rooms, putting handcuffs on people. So it's one thing to have the back end of the case, and definitely that's a very important part, but it's also a lot different when you see those victims bawling their eyes out one moment and then, trying to attack you to protect their attacker the next. So you really need somebody that can specialize in that. And it's not that you need it. It's that the state of Florida has said, you shall do this. And I can tell you in my dealings, the domestic violence, again, there's really no intake. It's just whatever division it gets assigned to, right? So there is, to say there's no intake would be a misstatement. There is an intake insofar as that the case is filed and then it's assigned a division. I mean, and so that is it. But then you have anyone from 6 months or 1 day of experience all the way up to, 30 years of experience taking these cases on. And that's why you can get a very different kind of reaction across the board, and that's why one consistent voice of an intake department could help guide that and specialize in that as required. So there are certain things that just aren't done, and there's really not a great reason for it. And I mean, again, it costs nothing to get a person. It costs nothing to make divisions, right, and to get specializations. And our office used to do that. They used to do that. Right now, the major crimes division is one person. So that's not really a division.
Well, I've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to do a rapid fire round.
Sure.
Yeah. So you better be good because I could talk to you all day because I feel like I'm in my own
Bay County,
my own.
juries. I mean, there's so much
stuff, my own Law and Order episode here, which I watch every episode. So just so you know. But anyways, rapid fire. So I'll just throw out topics, and I want your opinion. A sentence or two. DUIs.
Sure. Well, I used to be a DUI enforcement officer, so no one in the world wants to keep people off the road more. But we also do need to have a much more robust prevention program with alcohol counseling and treatment for first-time offenders where there's no property damage or injury.
Okay, illegal immigrants.
Enforce what we have, right? The problem there really is the federal government. The worst thing you can do sometimes is put an ICE hold because now all of a sudden the federal government gets involved. So that's really working closely with the Sheriff's Department and otherwise to come up with, like Texas and many other places have in Florida, a different route.
Protecting children and sex offenders.
No, as a parent and just as a human, there's no greater need. And again, having an intake department, and I know that you've limited me to short, but human trafficking comes to mind.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, human trafficking, the signs of that are not something everybody's trained to pick up on. So a lot of that can be missed. And one of the positions I want is to advocate for the state of Florida, not just locally, to have human trafficking an enhancement placed, because almost never is somebody actually charged with human trafficking. It's usually the easier crime that has the longer sentence. But for tracking purposes, it makes it very hard for us to say, well, how much of a human trafficking problem do we have? And that's nationwide. So if we can tack an enhancement on any crime, that would help. And that would definitely help children, because a lot of human trafficking, unfortunately, involves children.
Okay, Second Amendment and red flag laws.
Well, I'm a lifetime endowed Patriot member of the NRA, so I very much believe in guns and the citizen's right to a gun. And as far as red flag laws, that's really that's a civil proceeding initiated by the sheriff, so that's not something I'd have very much control on. But I would very happily give an investigator or a prosecutor to an advisory group if they asked for that.
Drugs, fentanyl.
Look, drugs and fentanyl are horrible. Fentanyl's tricky because now they're adding fentanyl to almost everything. So if you get cocaine, it's going to also test as fentanyl. But Governor DeSantis has done a wonderful job, and he's actually passed a lot more a lot harsher penalties on fentanyl. So you'll find no quarter from me if you're out selling drugs. If you're using drugs and you have an issue, then you'll also find no one that wants to get you help more than me.
Okay, murderers. I think you want to prosecute them.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I want to not only prosecute them, I want to prosecute them as quickly and expeditiously as possible, because it's being able to give that victim closure.
Okay, working with Sheriff's Office, Beach PD, FBI, DOJ. Who am I missing?
Oh, there's a lot. It's acronym alphabet salad, but look again. That's an active role. That's an active choice. That's taking your investigators and signing them as a liaison to each department, so the department knows who they can talk to. But it's also getting a crime analyst, right? What in the world is even going on in our county, and let's help maybe plug that together and stop larger trends.
And then I texted you this because I wanted to see if you could talk about it, and you said you could. Your opinion about what's been happening to President Trump. I mean, this is on the national level, but it's just been a nightmare, I think.
It introduced a new word called lawfare to the current vocabulary.
Sure. So what I can tell you is I'm not deeply familiar with every case, but I think the frustration that a lot of people see is the frustration that we're seeing here locally, right? And that's a two-tiered system of justice. And that is, at the end of the day, the good example is the Fannie Willis case in Georgia. You have somebody that very clearly knew they had a compromised position in a conflict, right? I mean, I don't think there's any guess of that. But instead of just selecting another individual, they fought and wanted, their person on there. A good example of that is, my opponent's son and daughter-in-law both work for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and they bring charges daily and weekly to the office. And I have no knowledge of him ever saying this is a conflict. I can't expect the people working for me to be able to feel free to do what they need to do with that case. And similarly, a lot of times conflicts aren't filed when they should be, and they are otherwise. It needs to be across the board, right? And it's a little more work and it's a little frustrating, but it's what justice demands. So, anytime you see this, it's an issue. And what I would say is that, another thing that we're seeing, whether it's the classified documents case or the New York fraud case, where it's 2-year misdemeanor that they had to finagle into, pair with a federal crime to extend the statute of limitations. Even if it is a crime, minor or otherwise, if it's something that no one else is getting hit with, and all of a sudden a political opponent is being hit with it, that's when it starts raising eyebrows, and something that may be proper starts to really feel improper. And again, you had that. You have a lot of that here locally. And again, I could talk for a very long time about examples and otherwise, but I think that the real issue and the real heartburn locally is the exact same heartburn that we're feeling with President Trump, right? And if you don't like what's happening to him, I would tell you wouldn't like a lot of what's going on around here. And the problem is that there's really no reason for it. You can get other people. Either it's a good charge or it's a bad charge, and if it's not, you get them the next time. But what it starts doing is it starts slowly eroding the faith in the criminal justice system, and then that spills over to jurors and otherwise. And, to get a political win, you really erode at the overall system and our Constitution.
So, Eric, you're running to be our next state attorney. Final question. Why should voters choose you, Eric Garmon, to be our next state attorney?
I've served my community in one way or another for 20 years. And look, it's what I was made to do. I've got a great life right now. I'm an attorney. I'm married with 2 wonderful children, but I've decided to take this on because my community needs it. And what you need to know is that criminals and people who've truly committed crime will find absolutely no fiercer opponent than myself. But if you have not truly committed a crime, or if it's questionable, we're going to look into it, and we're going to make sure that you're, being treated fairly. It's not the criminal prison system; it's the criminal justice system. And sometimes justice, it's not even being soft on crime; it's being very hard on crime, but being logical and having that stance to be able to say, you know what, no, not on this one. So if you want somebody that's going to make sure that bad people go away to jail and that you're treated fairly, go to Garmon2024.com. You can find out more there. I'm on Facebook as well, and I'd love to meet with anybody who'd like to meet with me as well.
Well, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, and John and I appreciate you coming on Veronica Live this morning, and at Garmon2024.com, and we'll definitely have you back.
Thank you so much.
Good luck, Eric.
We'll be right back on Veronica Live.